I never could forget the sound of gunfire carrying across the valley that morning, the sharp cracks rolling like thunder against the mesas, the smell of smoke drifting into the air as if the earth itself were on fire. I had ridden out before sunrise, hoping to mend a section of fence that had given way to last week's storm. But the moment I crested the ridge, I saw it. A neighbor's barn engulfed in flames. Horses screaming, men shouting, and the dark silhouettes of riders disappearing into the haze. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. Outlaws. Or worse, men paid by Dalton to do his dirty work. Cedar Ridge had known trouble before. But there was something in the way those riders moved, something deliberate, as if they were making a statement. I gripped the reins tighter and told myself to turn back. It wasn't my fight. But the truth is, every fight in this valley has a way of becoming mine, whether I want it or not. I was Samuel Kane, widower, at 33, owner of a patch of land that was either a blessing or a curse depending on the season. Folks said I was stubborn, maybe even cold, but losing Mary 3 years back had left me hollow. And when a man carries a hollow place inside him, he fills it with work, or whiskey, or silence. I chose silence. Silence in the long days under the sun, praying the land would yield enough to keep me alive another year. That morning, as the smoke coiled skyward, I thought again of how empty my house felt, how even the walls seemed to echo with her absence. Mary had been gentle, steady, the one who could turn even a broken-back day into something bearable. When the fever took her, I buried not just my wife, but my belief that God ever listened. And still, despite that, I had done something reckless not 2 months before. I'd written to a matchmaking agency back east. Me, a man who barely spoke more than what was necessary, asking strangers to find me a wife. I had asked for someone plain and hard-working, someone who would share the burden without expecting more than what I could give. I thought maybe that would be enough. Enough to keep the walls from closing in. Enough to keep the nights from feeling like punishment. But before I could dwell further, I spotted young Thomas O'Reilly sprinting up the hill. Toward me, his face pale, hair damp with sweat. "Mr. Kane," he shouted, breathless. "They came at dawn, took cattle, set fire to the barn. Pa says Dalton's behind it." I cursed under my breath. Dalton, his name, had a way of spoiling the air. Charles Dalton owned the biggest spread in the valley, a man who smiled only when others bent to his will. Folks said he was charming back east, before he came west to reinvent himself. But out here, he was pure steel and cruelty. He wanted every acre within sight of the ridge. Men like me were nothing but obstacles. "Get back to your family," I told the boy, though my eyes stayed fixed on the smoke. "I'll ride into town, see if the sheriff's doing a damn thing." The truth was, Sheriff Markham rarely did more than shuffle papers and tip his hat to Dalton's men. Still, I had to make the effort. It was the right thing to do, even if it amounted to nothing. On the ride into Cedar Ridge, my thoughts tangled between anger at Dalton and the strange unease of what awaited me that afternoon. The letter I'd received last week had confirmed it. My prospective bride was on the noon train from Boston. I had turned the envelope over in my hands a dozen times, wondering what kind of woman would abandon everything she knew to come west to a man she'd never met. Perhaps she was desperate. Perhaps she was foolish. Or perhaps she was braver than I could imagine. The town was already stirring when I arrived, the sun climbing higher, beating down with that merciless summer heat. The blacksmith hammered at his anvil, sparks flashing. Mrs. Collins stood on her porch with 2 other women, their voices sharp as knives as they traded gossip. I could feel their eyes on me as I tied my horse outside the general store. Folks liked to talk about Samuel Kane, the widower, the recluse. They speculated about my letters eastward, the rumors already swirling before the woman even set foot in town. Inside the store, the air was cooler, filled with the scent of coffee beans and dried tobacco. Mr. Jenkins greeted me with a wary nod. He was a good man, though cautious, always careful not to cross Dalton's influence. "You hear about the fire?" I asked. He sighed, wiped his brow. "Heard it. Same as always. Men ride in, take what they want. Sheriff won't lift a finger. Folks are scared. Kane, scared to stand up. Fear doesn't keep your cattle from being stolen," I muttered. He gave me a long look. then shifted the subject. Train comes in an hour. You going down? I didn't answer right away. My throat felt dry. Truth was, I'd considered not showing up at all. I could let the woman ride on, send her back east, spare us both the disappointment. But some stubborn part of me couldn't stomach the thought. I had sent for her. I had made that choice. And if nothing else, I wasn't a man who shirked responsibility by the time the whistle of the train split the air. A small crowd had gathered at the platform. Children darted between skirts, men leaned on posts, curious to see who might be arriving. The engine hissed, iron wheels grinding to a halt, and then the doors opened. Travelers stepped down, shaking dust from their coats. And then she appeared. Clara Whitmore. I knew her name from the letter, but nothing had prepared me for the reality. She was tall, poised, with auburn hair catching the sunlight like fire. Her eyes sharp, unflinching, swept over the crowd as if she'd walked this land 100 times before. She wore a traveling dress finer than most women here had ever seen. Yet there was something in the way she stood. A quiet defiance that unsettled me. Whispers rippled through the townsfolk. Mrs. Collins. Lips tightened like she'd swallowed vinegar. I felt my stomach knot. This was not the meek, modest woman I had asked for. This was someone else entirely. She caught sight of me, and for a moment, it felt as if the whole world stilled. Her gaze locked onto mine, and I swear it pierced through the walls I'd built around myself. I wanted to look away, to hide, but I couldn't. "Mr. Kane?" she asked when she reached me, her voice steady, with a trace of amusement. As if she already sensed my discomfort, I tipped my hat, forced words past my throat. "Miss Whitmore, welcome to Cedar Ridge." Her smile was faint, unreadable. "So, this is the West." She glanced past me at the dusty street, the staring faces. "I suppose I'll have to grow accustomed to the stares." I cleared my throat. "Folks here aren't used to strangers." "It'll pass." She raised a brow. "Will it?" Before I could answer, Sheriff Markham pushed his way forward, offering Clara a courteous bow that seemed polished for a man like him. "Miss Whitmore, pleasure to have you in our fine town. You'll find us." Welcoming. His eyes slid to me with something like warning. I stiffened. Clara, however, didn't flinch. She regarded him coolly, as if she'd already measured his worth. We wasted no time with pleasantries. Within the hour, papers were signed in the back of the general store, vows spoken with all the warmth of a business transaction. And just like that, Clara Whitmore became Clara Kane. On the ride back to the farm, the silence between us felt heavier than the heat. She sat tall in the saddle of the spare horse I'd brought, her dress dusty now, her cheeks flushed from the sun. At one point she caught me watching her and said, "You expected someone else, didn't you?" I tightened my grip on the reins. I expected someone. Different. Her laugh was low, tinged with something bittersweet. "You and me both, Mr. Kane, and though I didn't know it then, that moment was the beginning of everything, the battles, the secrets, the danger, and the fire that would burn away the cold walls I'd carried for far too long." The rain came slow that afternoon, like a promise half kept, drifting down in silver veils across the valley. I'd been repairing the north fence since morning, sweat soaking through my shirt, the wire biting at my palms. Clara stood across from me, her sleeves rolled, hair damp with mist, hammer in hand. For weeks the sky had threatened rain and given us nothing but dust. But now finally the earth darkened beneath the drops, drinking deep as if starved. And in that moment, with the thunder growling over the hills and the smell of wet sage heavy in the air, something inside me gave way. I caught myself watching her. The way her hair clung in tendrils to her cheek, the stubborn line of her jaw as she swung the hammer. She had come into my life like a fire, burning through walls I'd thought unshakable. I wanted to keep silent, to bury what was rising in me the way I'd buried Mary, deep and untouchable. But the words clawed their way out. "Clara," I said, the sound rougher than I intended. She paused, looked at me through the curtain of rain. I can't keep pretending you're just a duty I owe or a name on paper. These weeks with you, I found something I thought I lost forever. I love you." The hammer slipped from her hand, thudding into the mud. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd made a mistake, that she'd turn away, laugh, or remind me of the bargain that brought her here. But instead, she crossed the space between us in 2 quick steps. Rain running down her face, her eyes brighter than lightning. She reached for me, and when our lips met, the storm broke around us. The thunder cracked like heaven itself bearing witness. The wind tore at us, and for the first time in years I felt alive. Alive and unafraid. When we pulled apart, both breathless, she whispered, "I didn't come west to be anyone's shadow, Samuel. But with you I don't feel caged. I feel free." Her words lodged deep, reshaping everything I thought I knew about love. It wasn't about clinging to what was safe. It was about finding someone who set you ablaze in a world determined to snuff you out. The days that followed were hard, as they always were on the frontier, but they carried a lightness I hadn't known since before Mary died. Clara worked beside me in the fields, laughter spilling from her lips when a stubborn calf tugged her along by the rope. At night we sat by the fire, her hand in mine, silence comfortable and warm. I found myself telling her things I'd never spoken aloud, the fear I'd felt burying Mary, the bitterness that had nearly consumed me, the nights when the land felt like a prison. She listened, and in her listening, I began to heal. Yet shadows still lingered. Dalton had retreated into silence since the night his men were caught, but I knew silence could be more dangerous than open threat. He was a man who plotted, who struck when least expected. And in town, though some had begun to soften toward Clara, the whispers never truly ceased. Martha Collins kept her disapproving eyes sharp, and more than once I caught women turning their backs as Clara passed, their voices clipped and cruel. Clara bore it with her head high, but I saw the strain in the quiet moments when her shoulders slumped, when she thought no one was looking. I longed to protect her from every word, every glance, but she would not let me fight her battles. She had come west for freedom, and she meant to claim it in her own way. Then came the morning when she pressed my hand to her belly, her eyes wide, her voice trembling between joy and fear. "Samuel," she said, "we're not alone anymore." The child was still months from being, but in that instant I felt the weight of the future settle on me like a mantle. Hope and terror mingled. Could I raise another life in this harsh land? Could I keep them safe, both mother and child, with Dalton lurking, with drought always a threat, with neighbors divided by gossip and pride? I wanted to believe love was enough, but the West demanded more than love, demanded grit, sacrifice, and sometimes blood. When word spread, the town reacted in ways that revealed more than they intended. Some women smiled with genuine warmth, while others muttered that a woman like Clara had no business raising children in such conditions. At church, Pastor Bennett rose from the pulpit and spoke not only of new life, but of courage. "Sisters and brothers," he said, his eyes fixed on Clara, "we must see that God's gifts are not bound by custom. Sometimes it is the strongest among us who wear the gentlest face." His words silenced the murmurs, if only for a moment. I caught Clara's hand, pride swelling in my chest. She had become something more than my wife. She was a beacon. By midsummer, we gathered at our farm to celebrate the first good harvest since the drought broke. Neighbors came from miles around, wagons rattling, children laughing, men with their hats in hand as they shook mine. I saw faces that once scorned Clara, now softened by gratitude. They owed her more than they admitted. The water she'd discovered had saved their herds, their very lives. The air buzzed with fiddle music, the smell of roast beef and cornbread, the sound of boots stomping on the packed dirt as couples danced beneath lantern lights strung across the yard. Clara moved among them with a quiet grace, her laughter carrying, her hand brushing mine whenever she passed. I couldn't help but think of Mary then, not with guilt but with something close to peace. Mary had been my first chapter, but Clara was my second, and together they made me whole. It was Tom Bennett, the pastor's brother, who raised his glass and called for silence. "To Clara Kane," he said, his voice clear. "To the woman who reminded us all that courage doesn't come from a gun or a man's fist, but from a heart that refuses to bow. She's shown us that the West needs its women as much as its men and, maybe more." A cheer went up. and I saw Clara's cheeks flush, her eyes glistening. For the first time, the people of Cedar Ridge looked at her not as an outsider, but as one of their own. Still, I could not ignore the dark corners of that night. Dalton's men were absent, but I felt their presence in the distance, like wolves circling beyond the firelight. More than once, I thought I saw a figure linger at the tree line, watching. I told myself it was shadows, tricks of the lantern glow. But deep down, I knew Dalton would not stay quiet forever. And with Clara carrying our child, the stakes had never been higher. As the last of the neighbors departed, and the yard fell silent except for the crickets, Clara and I stood together on the porch. The horizon burned with the last of the sunset, streaks of crimson and gold fading into indigo. She slipped her hand into mine, her belly already a gentle swell beneath her dress. We said nothing for a long time, only listened to the land breathing, the world turning. At last she whispered, "Do you think we'll be all right?" I turned to her, brushing the damp hair from her face. "We've weathered fire and drought and men who'd see us ruined. We'll weather what comes next too." Together, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth, and in the distance, thunder rumbled once more, not with menace, but with promise. Rain would come again. The land would live. Our child would be born into a world remade, not by fate, but by the choices we'd fought for. And as I held Clara close, watching the night settle over Cedar Ridge, I felt something I thought I'd buried with Mary rise in me once more. Not just love, but hope. Hope fierce enough to defy Dalton, to silence the whispers, to carve a future out of the wilderness. A hope that burned brighter than any fire, stronger than any storm, and as enduring as the land beneath our feet. That was the night I knew. Whatever trials still lay ahead, we were no longer merely surviving. We were building something worth fighting for. Something that would outlast even us. And with Clara's hand in mine, the child stirring within her, and the horizon wide open before us, I believed for the first time in years that the West could be more than a graveyard of broken dreams. It could be home.